The following program is rated T for teen for the use of tools and materials that can be harmful to unsupervised usage. Viewer discretion is advised. Oh, and for some homegrown gangster stuff.
Hello everyone, Mr. Waugh here from Mr. Waugh Media. It's my name, repeat the joke, you know the drill. Today we return to Necromunda. We're going to be building some pipes, some merchant stalls, and accessories. Let's go! First of all, we will...
Oh man, I've got to stop drinking from unmarked bottles around my workshop. Alright, let's get started here. First off, we're going to build some bases for each of the scenery pieces. For this one, it'll be a strip of styrofoam. It's going to be about 2.5 inches wide by about 4 inches long. This should be long enough to accommodate the tiny piece of pipe that I got from the local hardware store for about 50 cents. Once I'm satisfied with the size of the template, I'm going to start cutting out some strips of cardboard here, about 1/2 centimeter in width. That way we have pieces to make the side paneling. With these in hand, I'm going to start gluing them into place with the hot glue gun. Now, if you feel that you don't have enough time to work with the hot glue gun, you can of course switch over to the white glue. However, it's a bit of a double-edged sword because, on the one hand, yes, it takes longer for it to dry, you have more time to manipulate it. On the other hand, it takes longer to dry, so it slows down your work production. Now, when it comes to these frames, you have total control right now of how detailed you want it to be. If you just want some strips along the side or a couple along the top, totally up to you. I kind of like the idea of fully framing them around all 4 sides on the top and the side panels. Especially when you start doing some hazard chevrons on there or some other effects. I just think it really ties it all together. So, totally up to you how detailed you want to make this thing. My vote is for all sides. And with that, we are now done. For the rest of the video, I will now refer to these and other pieces as your base. First up, we're going to work on piping and ooze. So we'll take this T-piece and we'll glue it onto the base with a hot glue gun and let it harden fully before moving on. Next step, we'll take our hot glue gun and make a large glob inside the pipe itself and start dragging down with the gun, leaving an oozing trail behind. Now, get rid of any spiderweb that might be on there. You want it to be thick, you want it to be visible, and start dragging it downward while it's still malleable and still wet. And then I'll cut off what's left over. We'll repeat the process about 2 or 3 times to get the desired thickness of the ooze dripping out of the pipe. I find about 1 inch looks pretty good, it's still believable, and with the multiple strains coming down, it just adds to the overall effect. While I'm at it, I'm also going to add a burst in the pipe about halfway through the T-junction and have it dripping down the pipe itself and pooling down at the bottom. This is just a really cool technique, and I just wanted to show you what this effect will look like in different areas. I'll probably do about 2 or 3 coats with this one as well, just to get the overall effect a little bit more depth, and from there, this is what it looks like. It's a handy little technique that's pretty universal. You can use it for blood, oil, septic, totally up to you. Next up, we're going to start working on our merchant stall. For this one, the base is going to be 3 inches by 4.5, and I'm going to start chopping up some of the styrofoam here. The width of these pieces will be 1 centimeter, and lengthwise, the front panel, 3 inches. The side piece here is going to be about 1.5, and I'm also going to need some pieces, once the L junction here is finished, for the back. These ones are going to be, again, 1 centimeter in width, but they're going to be about 3 inches tall. Now, you can make them a little bit taller if you like, if you want to try to show off a little bit more of the merchandise perhaps, but I found this height works pretty well for my gun kiosk, my meat shop, and the armory that I'm working on. Make sure that they are flat at the bottom, by the way, chop them as needed, and then we're going to start gluing everything into place. I'm going to start taking my hot glue gun here and mounting them firmly. Now, you can use the white glue if you prefer to have a little bit more time, but it's a relatively straightforward process of just gluing the L into shape. I don't think you need to worry about time management. We'll just firmly bolt the first and the second pillar here into place, grab the hot glue gun, and you're going to have a basic template that looks something like this. And from here, we can build off of it. Next up, we're going to take our cardboard and cut some long strips off of them, about 1 centimeter in width. Once we have them, we'll glue them to the front, the side, and the top of the styrofoam here to try to make it look like a more uniform front desk area. And let's face it, in the far future, when it comes to these marketplaces and, unsavory, let's say, neighborhoods, you might want to have some sort of a metallic barrier between you and a disgruntled customer. Let's face it, as someone who works retail, there's some people out there that don't understand the term no refund, and sometimes you do need to have a bolter handy, just in case. But you didn't come here to hear me groan about my day-to-day life. You came here to see us build an amazing piece of scenery. And look at that stall, isn't it amazing? With that side panel on there, finally, it's done. It's golden. It's touchdown! Woo! Look at that. Breathtaking. Am I overselling these things, or, Nah. Next up, we're going to go through our bits box. You can see here I got an assortment of pieces from saw blades, some meat and mushrooms from the goblins, a couple chains from chaos, and some Tyranid bits. The main idea is we're going to take a separate piece of cardboard and make a display case for the wares. I got a zombie torso, some Tyranid ball sacks, a zombie arm, and a severed orc head. All the fresh meat you can find in the Underhive. And with that, we're going to glue it to the very front of the stall. I've also glued a second panel between the two pillars in the back where we can mount some more meat. Now, I'm going to take that orc saw blade that we saw earlier, and I'm going to glue it to the side. Think of it as one of those meat cutters you see in a butcher shop. It's just kind of gnarly looking. I don't think this is very sanitary, but it is what it is. I'm going to take a leftover strip and quickly glue it to the top of the piece, just to round it all out. And then I'm going to start gluing the meat to the back rack. I'll take the hot glue gun and mount them firmly into place. Don't worry about it if it's a little bit of a glob there. We can always paint over it with red. It can be, crusted blood on the back piece. I'll try to make it as clean as I can here, but again, if you make some mistakes, don't worry about it too much. Again, it's not the most sanitary looking place. I don't think this has a very high health rating with the Bureau. Probably like a D-, maybe. Maybe an F. Alright, but one of the main delicacies is severed arm. So I took an orc boy's arm without the weapon and chopped it into 3 pieces. I'm going to mount this as clean as I can right below the saw blade. You can imagine, the butcher in mid-strike was preparing a meal for you guys. Severed limbs. Delicacy. Tasty. Wonderful. Goes well with soy sauce, apparently. But not ketchup. Look at that, really coming together here. It's mom and pop shop. It's family owned and operated. Let's get rid of the spider web there. We have standards here, people. Standards. Now I'm going to add a couple little quick updates. A couple strips along the side there just to make it look a little bit more industrial. I added the back piece, and I added a top so I can have a billboard. Now, this is just the meat market. What about some alternatives? How about big Dex guns? Instead of the food everywhere, I've put blades, a couple illegal weapons. You can see in the background some Tau and a couple Dark Eldar rifles and pistols here and there. And it's basically whatever you have in your bits box that you can throw up there. And, just adds a little bit of flavor to your battlefield. The next scenery piece that we're going to work on is a giant industrial fan. And this is built out of some spare computer parts that I happen to have lying around in my shop. So I've made a base piece already for it, and now I'm also going to make a second base that's going to go on top. It's going to basically be sandwiched between the two. Now the top piece, I'm not going into quite as much detail. I only want the frame to go around the outside edge, not on the top. If you feel like maybe it does need some chevrons on the top layer, or maybe some of that screen door I showed last time, go ahead. Whatever you think will bring this piece to life. I'm going to take this computer part, and I'm going to start hot gluing it to the base. Again, if you want to use white glue, crazy glue, you do you, boo. Whatever your flavor is. Just don't eat it, because it's not good for you. And with that final piece mounted, we are now done our freestanding industrial fan. It's a great piece of line-of-sight blocking scenery, or maybe used for platforming to get to higher levels. Yeah, it's just a solid little piece. We're now going to jump into the painting segment. So, as usual, I'm going to start using a primer of black acrylic paint. This stuff I buy in bulk because, let's face it, I go through a lot of it. So, we're just going to cover the entire piece, slather it, get into all the nooks and crannies, and we'll go from there. Once I've given it ample time to dry, we'll take 1 part black and 1 part white to make a medium gray color. And we'll dry brush that across the entire pipe and parts of the base where we want it to look like concrete. I'll also do it along the sides here, anywhere there's not going to be a chevron. Next up, we'll take 2 parts white and 1 part black to make a lighter gray color, and we'll dry brush this across all the areas. You'll notice I'm alternating my brushstroke pattern to leave a little bit of the darker color behind. This is a cheap and easy way of getting that color effect of concrete without having to rely on different textures and techniques, instead just using your basic acrylic paints. So far, I think it's coming together here. Next up, I'm going to take 3 parts white, 1 part black to make an even lighter gray color, and this one is going to be a light dusting across all the pipe and a very light dusting across the concrete. Once again, I'm doing it in different random patches on the concrete itself to give it that nice effect. Now, I'm pretty satisfied with how this color looks right now, but if you want to take it a step further, you can go back in with a final layer of pure white and lightly dust it across the entire surface. This is really going to make it pop out later on, depending on how bright your battlefield is, but for me, I'm actually kind of satisfied with how this looks. Totally up to you, though, what aesthetic you want. It is now time to paint the ooze. I'm going to start with some dark forest green. And this is just some basic acrylics that I found at the dollar store. And we're going to slap that across everywhere we want to be ooze. Make sure to get it all over that ooze tendril that's coming out of the pipe. And especially from the side, bursting ooze that's pooling around the base. Ooze. Yes, I'm a grown man that's saying ooze. But you love it. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. For the next layer, we're going to use a dark olive color. This one from Citadel is called Castellian Green. And we're going to apply it almost across the entire surface of the ooze, leaving just a little bit of the dark green behind. The whole idea behind this is we'll keep adding lighter and lighter green colors to this mix to give a nice 3-dimensional look to our ooze. For the next layer, also from Citadel, is Lauren Green. I describe it as maybe a smashed peas color. Like, I don't know, if you took a bunch of vegetables and just mashed them together. Yeah, it's that kind of green. Once that layer is done, like so, we'll move on to the last green color, called Death Guard Green. Don't know how to describe this one. I haven't really eaten anything that looks like this, probably for good reason. But yeah, that's also going to go on there. Now, if you don't have these exact ones, I'd recommend probably getting some generic greens, mixing them with some yellows and browns, and just sort of experimenting, adding a little bit of white as you go along. Until we get something like this. Look at it! It's so beautiful! Oh my god! Let's get in there! Oh my god!
I want your baby!
There we go. And as you can see, we have a nice contrast between our hard industrial look and the ooze that is secreting from said pipe. Fascinating. But wait, there's more! Now, I'm not usually a big fan of these contrast paints from Citadel. I think they're a little bit more hassle than they're worth, but they do have their purpose. For me, I picked up some contrast orc flesh, and I applied it over all of the ooze to give a really neat gloss effect. Look at it.
Oh my god. It's so beautiful.
There's only one way we can do this. Zoom in, fellers.
Charge! Oh my god, I want to see it!
Look at it with your eyes. Now, I really like this. Because we've built up the colors in different layers underneath and that gloss on top of it, this really gives it that nasty ooze look. Next up, also from Citadel Paints, is Agrax Earthshade, and I'll apply a layer across all the ooze, and I'll probably do a layer over the entire piece later on once all the detail work is finished. So you can see here, it has a nice look to it. It's really nasty, especially where it's pooled at the bottom there. Ah, this is great. The next step is going to be painting these chevrons. Now, in the previous episode, I went into a lot more detail of how to go about this step by step, but for a quick refresher, anywhere you want the chevrons to be, do an undercoat of white paint. Then you're going to paint the entire area with a golden yellow color. You can use some lighter ones if you choose, but I find this is a little bit more realistic with the concrete. Once that's all dried, you go in with a pen or pencil and start drawing in your lines diagonally. Then you fill it in with black paint, and you'll get something like this. Again, it's a little bit more detailed in the previous video, but overall the concept is relatively straightforward. And then you're rewarded with a great looking piece like this. The next piece we're going to work on is the giant industrial fan, and the colors are going to be identical to the first piece. We'll start with our black primer, and we'll start adding more and more white to the mix until we're working with a very light gray color and dry brushing that across the surface. Once we have all of our concrete colors done, we'll go in with our white to start doing the chevrons. Exact same technique, we'll apply it along the edges or anywhere else we want the chevrons. We'll go in with the yellow and just try to cover everywhere as evenly as possible. For this one, I decided on the lower base, it's going to be along the top edge. I did the full frame around it, whereas the top piece is just going to be along two of the sides. I think that's really going to make it pop out from a distance. Once that's done, I've penciled in my lines diagonally, and then I go in with a fine brush and start applying the black paint in between each of them. This next step is one that I use in most of my builds, but for whatever reason, I didn't actually film it in the last video, so I apologize for that one. All you gotta do is take some generic brown and lightly dry brush it in certain patches, giving it a nice dusty, dirty, kind of rusted look. You could obviously add a little bit more orange to the mix to give it an even more rusty look, but for me, I find the brown just pretty much goes with everything. Once I've let that completely dry, we're going to go in with a large brush and apply a generous coating of Agrax Earthshade across the entire surface. As you can see here, it gives it that nice finish and really ties the whole piece together. Check it out. It's now time to work on the final piece. This is, of course, the meat shop. Now, it's going to have a slightly different color palette to it. We're going to start with priming the entire piece with acrylic black, and then we're going to dry brush the entire piece with brown. Now, this is a great color to build off of when it comes to metallics, when it comes to our red colors, and of course, flesh. So we'll do a generous coating across everything, make sure a little bit of the black is poking through between the cracks, but once that is done, we will move on to our next step. We're going to take a gunmetal color, in this case lead belchers from Citadel, and we're going to dry brush it across the entire surface. Now try to keep it on the metallic areas and try not to get in the food, but again, this isn't exactly the most sanitary of food establishments. So do a full coat over everything until you get it looking like so. We're now going to start painting all of the meat sources. Meat. Doesn't have quite the same ring as ooze. Probably tastes better though. Anyway, this is a 3-part flesh technique that I picked up from a friend of mine. First off, we're going to use a layer of light orange from Vallejo, and we're going to apply it across almost everything. Just a little bit of that black and brown should be showing through any of the flesh. We'll apply it across all these pieces, especially these giant Tyranid bits on the back wall. Try to keep it as close as you can to the material itself and not get onto the walls, but if you do, don't worry, we can always go back and fix it later with massive blood splats. And there's our first coat. At this time, it doesn't look like anything to write home about, but it's a great launching point for us to do the next layers. It's going to be called Salmon Rose, also from Vallejo, and this one we're going to dry brush on a little bit lighter. Try to keep on the raised areas as much as possible. Again, if you start having slip-ups here and there, we're going to cover everything in blood later, so don't worry about it too much. Just try to make it look as nice as you can, alright? Alright. If you do mess up, it's just a happy little accident. Alright. And it'll be beautiful no matter what. Just like you. You unique, beautiful snowflake. Look at that. Alright. For the final color, we're going to use Basic Skin Tone, also from Vallejo, and this one's going to be a very light dusting across the entire surface. Bob, you want to say something about this? Alright, well, just put it on there. You can see already how beautiful the transformation is. And if you do get it anywhere, don't worry. It's just a happy little accident, and we can cover that in lots of blood. So much blood. And speaking of blood, let's do a time jump to the far future. So much blood. Thanks, Bob. I'm sure you're giving all of our viewers nightmares. As Bob said, we did a time jump here, and I've applied all the chevrons along the outer edge and a generous coat of red paint around all of the chopped meat and the boards on top where his name's going to be. Now, this was a mix of corn red as the base coat, and then I did a dry brush on top of Mephiston red as well, both from Citadel. Once I have all the reds splattered where I want, the chopped meat, the severed limbs, the saw blade, of course, I'm now going to go over the entire piece and apply the Agrax Earthshade to everything. Once I let that fully dry, it's time to come up with a name for our shop, which I quickly penciled in so I know the full blocking of all the letters. Now, I decided on Beats Meat Shop. Mr. Beat is a, upstanding citizen. He's a salt of the earth kind of guy, and this is his meat shop. Just like Deck owns the gun shop. Big Deck's Guns and Beat Meat Shop. Subtle. Do you get it? I get it. Well, here are our final products. We have our fan, we got our pipe, we have our merchant stall, and even some freestanding pieces like this flower bed that was made out of styrofoam into a rectangle and just added some sand and some aquarium plants on top. Overall, these pieces are extremely easy to build, take less than half an hour to fully construct, and as long as you're consistent with your paint, all tie together. And here are all the pieces, the merchant stalls, the freestanding pieces, the pipes, the buildings. I think this is looking pretty awesome, so stay classy, Necromunda.
Oh yeah, we be rocking the club. You ain't even a gangster. I am too. Yo, I'm a gangster.
No, you just sounding the same, man. Aren't you sick of spitting lies?
Now we're repping the game. Oh yeah, we be rocking the club. You ain't even a gangster. I am too. I am too. I am too. Gangster.
Well, that's been today's episode. I hope that you were entertained. If you were, make sure that you hit the like, the share, subscribe down below, and please pass this around to all of your friends. And if there's anything you want me to build in an upcoming episode, put it down in the comments down below, and maybe we'll get around to it in an upcoming episode. On that note, I have been Mr. Waugh from Necromunda. I'll catch you later.